Of Hamilton, says Tricia. Thanks for your time. See you tomorrow. Checkpoint next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te rerangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the raw grief and rage at the sentencing of a teenage driver who was the sole survivor of a horrific crash that killed 5 of his mates. Wellington gets moving slowly. The government unveils plans for light rail and another Mount Vic tunnel, but how long before the train actually pulls into Island Bay Station? And more challenges coming down the tracks for Auckland's Central Rail link, including increased costs and delays. The Transport Minister is live. Urgent clinics in Wellington are swamped in a wave of winter ills. We've also got an update on a Waikato hospital patient who waited days for acute surgery. And from socialite to prison, Ghislaine Maxwell gets 20 years in jail for recruiting girls for sexual abuse.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Madie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The mother of one of 5 teenage boys killed in a crash near Timaru has told the High Court that visions of his dying moments are etched in her mind. 16-year-old Jack Wallace and 4 friends died in the crash last year. The driver and sole survivor, Tyrese Fleming, has been sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison for dangerous driving causing death. Chantel Roberts says she couldn't get images of Jack out of her mind in the days after the crash.
Visions of my beautiful child slammed into the cold wet grass laying there dying. I imagined his final breath. Was he scared? Did he have any suffering? Those are questions I will never know and always wonder, knowing that my baby was so badly hurt it killed him and I wasn't there to comfort him.
Chantel Roberts told the court she had laid down on the grass at the cemetery with her arms stretched over her son's plot in an attempt to hug him. The National Party says the government's plan to overhaul Wellington's transport system won't do anything to stop gridlock in the capital. Labour's preferred option to overhaul the capital's transport infrastructure includes light rail to the south coast and a new tunnel through Mount Victoria for buses, bikes and walkers. It's expected to cost about $7.4 billion. But National's transport spokesperson, Simeon Brown, says it won't fix the capital's traffic problems.
Government's had 5 years to actually do something, and today's announcement is just exactly what we saw 3 years ago, and still no funding, no business case, and no plan to actually start delivery till 2028.
Simeon Brown is accusing Labour of putting its ideological preference for light rail ahead of what Wellingtonians actually need. It's been confirmed the man charged with stabbing Laisa Madayawaka to death in the Christchurch suburb of Sockburn on Saturday is a mental health patient. The 37-year-old was on community leave from a specialist service at Hillmorton Hospital when the attack happened. Neva Chittick has more.
Canterbury District Health Board Chief Executive Peter Bramley says a full review is being undertaken into the care the man received. He says any recommendations made by the review will be acted on, and the DHB is continuing to help police with their investigation. Mr Bramley says his thoughts are with Miss Walker's family and friends. The man has been charged with murder and will appear in Christchurch High Court next month.
The Health Minister is rubbishing accusations he ignored warnings about the health workforce. The issue was raised in a letter from District Health Boards nearly a year ago. Andrew Little says criticism by National MP Shane Reti mixes up the letter's specific concerns about MIQ with general concerns about the health workforce.
Shane is very good at going on these sort of John le Carre style escapades for things that don't exist. And so he's got a letter that the DHB Chief Executive sent to MB because of the problems they were having with MIQ, but that was the extent of it.
Andrew Little says he only became aware of the letter when it was released in request under the Official Information Act. He says the global labour market is incredibly competitive and the government is doing everything it can. And the committee investigating the attack last year on the US Capitol building has heard a first-hand account of the day's events from Cassidy Hutchinson, a former White House insider. She says Donald Trump knew some of his supporters had weapons and wanted to join them. Barbara Pletasha reports from Washington.
Cassidy Hutchinson had given several recorded depositions, but the committee unexpectedly called an urgent hearing so she could testify publicly. It was a riveting hour of explosive revelations. That Donald Trump knew many in the crowd at his White House rally were armed, but still urged them to march on the Capitol. That he was so determined to go with them, he tried to grab the steering wheel of his limousine when told he couldn't. And that a White House lawyer warned he could be charged with every crime imaginable if he did.
To sport, and former Chiefs midfielder Bundy Aki will lead Ireland against the Māori All Blacks in Hamilton tonight, knowing several of the Māori side will have a point to prove. It's the first match between the two sides since 2010, when the Māori All Blacks won 31-28. Several players in the Māori side were unlucky to miss out on the All Black Test side, and Aki feels they'll be keen to prove the selectors wrong.
Obviously, it's a huge thing facing the haka. There's a lot of heritage behind that. Just embrace it. There'll be a lot of pride. There'll be a lot of guys trying to make a statement. It's their backyard that we're going to be playing in.
Meanwhile, new All Black Stephen Perofeta has extended his contract with the Blues through until the end of the 2024 season. Serena Williams' hopes of a victorious return to Wimbledon after a year out have ended with a shock loss to French debutante Harmony Tan. The 40-year-old, seven-time champion, has returned to the same centre court where she had limped out injured last year. She was willed on by a fervent crowd but was beaten in a third-set tie-break by the 115th ranked Tan.
Like I said, any other opponent probably would have suited my game better. I mean, I was ready for it. I knew going into there was a lot of slice, but not so much on the forehand and et cetera. So definitely had to try to find my rhythm out there. And you got to think if I were playing matches, I wouldn't miss or lose some of those points or miss this match.
And the A-League football season will start earlier than usual, with the first round kicking off on October 7th before taking a break for the World Cup. That's the news.
Extraordinary revelations.
I'm the acting president. Take me up to the Capitol now. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel.
Ghislaine Maxwell is sentenced for sex trafficking.
The result was incalculable damage to the victims, and the sentence must reflect that. It is a substantial sentence, 20 years.
And another successful launch for Rocket Lab.
Huge team effort, so much work, so much new technology. So, everyone is quite literally over the moon.
Keeping you grounded. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, rain with a few heavy falls, easing to isolated showers tonight. From Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne, scattered showers turning to rain in Bay of Plenty and Gisborne today, with heavy falls possible north of Tolaga Bay. Mostly fine tomorrow, apart from isolated showers about the west coast and Gisborne. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Hawke's Bay. Scattered light showers clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Isolated showers are developing in the west tomorrow evening. For Wairarapa, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Scattered showers developing in Canterbury tomorrow evening, possibly heavy with hail. Bulla and Westland, isolated showers today. A period of rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers clearing from Southland and Otago this evening. A period of rain tomorrow, followed by showers with possible thunderstorms and hail in the south and snow to 400 metres. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, occasional rain until tomorrow evening. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have the latest news headlines and a look at the traffic for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Devastated families have told of their absolute heartbreak of losing their teenage boys when their car smashed into a power pole in Timaru last year. The car was driven by then 19-year-old Tyrese Fleming, who was the sole survivor, and today he was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in jail, a sentence some grieving family members said means nothing. Jean Edwards reports from Timaru.
Grieving family and friends came to court speaking of unbearable loss and shattered lives. Visions of 16-year-old Jack Wallace's dying moments were etched in his mother Chantel Roberts' mind in the days after the crash.
Visions of my beautiful child slammed into the cold wet grass laying there dying. I imagined his final breath. Was he scared? Did he have any suffering? Those are questions I will never know and always wonder, knowing that my baby was so badly hurt it killed him, and I wasn't there to comfort him.
She told the court of her utter devastation.
The only way I can be as close as possible to Jack is going to the cemetery where he lays, and it's so incredibly sad looking at his final resting place. I have even gone as far as to lay my head down on the grass with my arms outstretched over his plot in a pathetic attempt to hug him.
Tyrese Fleming had obtained his restricted driver's licence just 3 days before the crash. He'd been drinking before he got behind the wheel of the overloaded car with one of the boys in the boot and smashed into the power pole at speed, splitting the car in two. Nico Hill's mother, Carissa Hill, says her world was turned upside down in an instant.
And Tyrese, it was your hands on the steering wheel and your foot on the pedals, and you're the reason I had this life sentence of never seeing or touching or hearing his voice ever again for the rest of my life. You didn't just take Nico's life, you destroyed mine as well.
Nico's auntie Jess Hill works as a nurse at Timaru Hospital, where she's constantly reminded of the accident.
For me to get to work, I need to walk down past the morgue every shift. I will never forget the sound of my sister and my brother-in-law crying, screaming over their son's lifeless body. It hits me like a ton of bricks every time.
Defence lawyer Thomas Nation told the court Fleming had shown remorse, offered to pay $20,000 in reparation if he was sentenced to home detention, and was willing to take part in a road safety campaign video. He read a statement from Fleming apologising to the victims' families.
I will forever be truly, truly sorry for what I have caused. I say this with my whole heart because it's a really tragic thing that should have never happened. I'm so angry and shameful at myself that it did happen. I regret all of the bad decisions I made on that night because it has affected so many people's lives forever, especially the families that lost their beloved son.
Justice Rob Osborne sentenced Fleming to 2 years and 6 months in jail. Outside court, Giovanni Drummond's father, Stephen Drummond, said he was disappointed.
I don't think a lot of it, to be honest with you. He killed 5 kids. I know it was like you choose to drink and you drive and everything else. It wasn't just a pure accident.
Andrew Goodge's father, Richard, told the court he's been living in an absolute hellhole since the crash, but he's trying to forgive Fleming.
It's going to take a long time for me to actually forgive him properly. I have forgiven him, but I haven't forgiven him 100%.
Tyrese Fleming was initially charged with manslaughter but pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of dangerous driving causing death.
It is 11 minutes past 5. Kia mau tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government's unveiled its plan to get Wellington moving, but it could take some time to get the plan going. It wants light rail and a second Mount Victoria tunnel for the capital as part of the Let's Get Wellington Moving project. The additional tunnel will be for buses and cars, while the existing one will be for cyclists and pedestrians only. The plan also includes a light rail network to Island Bay, but with a fallback option of a rapid bus network. If it's greenlit by local councils, the business case alone could take until 2024 to complete. Well, joining us now is Transport Minister Michael Wood. Kia ora, Minister. People will want to know when they will be able to catch this light rail train to Island Bay. When, do you reckon?
Yes, I know there's huge enthusiasm and people want us to get on with the job. The indicative year that has been identified by the Let's Get Wellington Moving team is approximately 2031, 2032 for the service to be fully operational. But myself and the other sponsors of the project are working with officials to try and accelerate that as much as possible. And one of the options we have raised with them for further investigation is looking at phasing. So are there ways in which we can bring forward parts of the project so we get the benefits to the people of Wellington as soon as possible?
If you were going to do it that way, which part of it would be your priority? Would it be the light rail?
Yes, we certainly think that the high-quality public transport options of this package are the most important thing that we can provide to Wellingtonians. We obviously have to get good technical advice to inform the decisions that we make, but that is a real priority. That's what's been lacking through this part of Wellington for too long. That's why we have such high levels of congestion and carbon emissions, and we want to give people those choices.
How quickly could you do it if you were delivering it in stages with the rapid light rail coming first?
As I say, Lisa, we would have to get more technical advice on that. We are now moving into the detailed business case stage, which is when we start to get the really good information, the good analysis about how we actually deliver this project. That will be one of the things that we'll be asking the team as part of this piece of work.
It's costly, $7.4 billion. So what do you reckon, a regional petrol tax in Wellington to pay for it?
Look, it is a significant investment. You simply don't build these sort of large-scale public transport systems in built-up cities without a real investment. But after 50 years of kicking the can down the road, it is important we get on with it. We are looking at the full range of funding options, and we confirmed today that Cabinet has agreed that I'll be doing a piece of work with the Minister of Finance to look at what the appropriate funding mechanisms for mass rapid transit are, whether it's this project, Auckland Light Rail, the alternative Waitemata Harbour crossing. We want a sustainable and equitable funding model across different cities as we deliver these projects. And as a part of that, we will consider some of those alternative funding mechanisms, including value capture.
Right, so regional tax and tolls are on the table potentially.
We are considering those options. We haven't made decisions, but in the case of Wellington, we have been received a letter from the Wellington City Council and Greater Wellington Regional Council, and they've formally asked the government to investigate some of those options, and so we are now undertaking that.
Minister, I know you're tight on time, so I want to get through a couple of things really quickly. Have you secured all the land and houses you need along those routes in order to complete this project?
No, not at this stage. This is an indicative decision that we have made. We would then expect that sort of work to happen as we begin to move through the detailed business case. But we will be making sure that the unit is, that the team is set up to be able to take advantage of opportunities where they arise to make sure that we're purchasing land.
Given this is such a massive project, don't you need to sit down with opposition parties and get a cross-party agreement to make sure it goes ahead? Because it's not going to be finished, potentially, in an election cycle with the current government.
Look, the curse of many of these projects over the years in New Zealand is that we haven't had that level of certainty about the big public transport projects that our cities need. I am absolutely open to working with other parties to build up consensus. And in fact, I spoke to a couple of opposition spokespeople after question time today. I've offered to provide them with briefings on this project, and I'm absolutely open to a conversation. Wellingtonians want this to get done. They want us to get on with it. They've been waiting for too long. So if we can work together to give that certainty, then I'd be very keen to do that. And I put that offer out there to all other political parties.
Can I get a very quick answer? The CRL is going to cost more than was expected. This is the rail link in Auckland. Is the government going to pick up the tab for the overrun?
Well, obviously the impacts of COVID-19 on big construction projects are significant. We do expect that there are going to be additional costs as a result of that. We'll have a clear idea about what those will be by approximately the end of this year. We have to go into a commercial negotiation with the private sector players who are constructing the project for us. The project is a 50-50 split between central government and Auckland Council, and so by definition the costs are shared by us on that basis.
Thanks for joining us, Minister. That's Transport Minister Michael Wood. It is 16 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, the biggest challenges for Auckland City Rail Link are likely yet to come, according to the watchdog on government spending. A report into the multi-billion-dollar project by the Auditor-General's Office says it will cost more than has been budgeted and take longer than expected, partly due to COVID. The 3.4 kilometre twin tunnel underground rail link is expected to double the number of Aucklanders living within 30 minutes travel of the city centre. But the report says the CRL will likely face more disruptions due to supply chain delays and competition for workers. Ko taku manuhiri inai ko Phil Goff, the Auckland Mayor, joins us now live. Phil, how much more do you reckon it's going to cost?
Oh, good evening, Lisa. Look, I just heard the tail end of Michael Wood's comments to you on that. Look, COVID has had a big impact on CRL. For example, 230 days they had to spend under lockdown or restricted working conditions. That's of course slowed the project in some respects and will add somewhat to the cost, but I think that there's good news in that. We had the first tunnel breakthrough just before Christmas. I walked down that tunnel just last week with the Chief Executive of the City Rail Link Limited, and the second tunnel is going to break through at the end of September, so just in a couple of months' time. The engineering work is pretty much gone, as we would expect, but there were all sorts of problems. You know, we could only do about a metre a day instead of 20 or 30 metres a day that you'd normally expect because of the conditions of the lockdown.
Yeah, and I suppose, Phil, sorry to interrupt, I know people will appreciate what has slowed it down, but 230 days of delays, does that cost you millions or does that cost you billions?
I don't think it'll cost billions, and I don't think the delay will be excessive. We were hoping to complete the CRL by the end of 2024. Probably it's going to be in the first half of 2025. That's my best guess on that. What it will cost specifically, we don't know yet, because there are negotiations going on between City Rail Link Limited and the Link Alliance, which covers the different companies involved in the contract.
That's a bit rough for ratepayers and taxpayers, isn't it? Because we're already $4.4 billion into the hole, so to speak, and to not know, it's kind of like an open-ended cheque.
We'll know when the negotiations have concluded, but I'm not about to interrupt or interfere with those or prejudice those negotiations by speculating on how much more might need to be paid to the contractors. But look, I do expect the cost to have gone up. I don't expect it to have gone up to the extent that some of the other major projects have suffered from cost increases around the country and around the world. We've had a pretty good operating model working between the Link Alliance, which is a group of companies, some international, some local, where we share the profits where things are done more cheaply, and we share the losses if they're more expensive. It's worked out well as a model for us, and I think that will help contain some of the cost increases.
Minister, they're saying you're basically 50-50 partners in the cost of this and therefore in the overruns. Has the council got its share to pay the overruns? The 50-50 deal was worked through between the last national government and the council before I came on board. I'd always argue from an Auckland perspective we're the only city in the country that has to contribute to the cost of heavy rail. But that was the agreement that was reached by a previous council and a previous government. Are you going to ask them to alter that, Phil? Are you going to ask them to pick up the whole tab for the overrun?
I think Michael Wood made it pretty clear that their expectation is 50-50. When we had to look at future-proofing it back in 2019, that was an additional $1 billion. It was 50-50 then, and I think the same arrangements will provide. But I'm not expecting the cost to be at that level, but I really don't know at the moment because I haven't been told.
Okay. One of the other things pointed out in this report is there's confusion over who is responsible for quantifying the benefits that we're all going to get from this multi-billion-dollar project, and with, quote, specific, measurable and realistic goals. What are those measures going to be, and when are we going to hear what they are?
Yeah, okay. Look, first of all, just, what did the Auditor-General say? And I'll quote one sentence. I wanted to provide Parliament and the public with the assurance that the CRL project's governance was effective and likely to support its successful completion. So we got a big tick from the Office of the Auditor-General, for which I'm very grateful. He did talk about the need to better quantify the benefits, and he then says, I'm sure you've read the report, or at least the executive summary, he says that the officials and the delivery partners are working to address that concern. They've now completed the first stage of the Comprehensive Benefits Realisation Plan. They did that last month. The second phase will be done by, I think, early next year. And what's been really good is that the Auditor-General has been positive and constructive. He's given some good advice. We've taken that advice on board and we're implementing that advice in full.
Appreciate your time, Phil. That is Phil Goff, the Mayor of Auckland. It's 22 minutes past 5. And we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, homai or whakaaro. If you're in Wellington, what do you think about the plan to get Wellington moving? Is it worth the money? Do you agree with the proposal? If not, why not? And CRL delayed delivery of the project, and it's going to cost us more. Again, what are your thoughts on that one? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The sole survivor of a crash which killed 5 teenaged boys near Timaru last year will spend 2.5 years in prison. Tyrese Stewart Fleming was sentenced during emotionally charged scenes at the High Court in Timaru today. The father of victim Andrew Goodger, Richard, told the court he's been living in an absolute hellhole since the crash, but he's trying to forgive Fleming. The Transport Minister says the days of cars cramming into Wellington's city centre are numbered. The government has released its preferred option to overhaul the capital's transport infrastructure, which includes light rail to the south coast, a new tunnel through Mount Victoria and roads rearranged around the Basin Reserve. Michael Wood told Checkpoint it's estimated to be fully functional by 2031 or 2032, but that he and other officials will try and accelerate that timeline. It's been confirmed that the man charged with the murder of Ms Walker was a current mental health patient. The Canterbury DHB Chief Executive, Peter Bramley, says the 37-year-old was in a specialist mental health service at Hillmorton Hospital. A former White House aide has given damning first-hand testimony of Donald Trump's actions during the storming of the US Capitol building last year. Cassidy Hutchinson told the latest congressional hearing the former president was aware that some of his supporters were armed but didn't care. Mr Trump has dismissed Ms Hutchinson as a phony. And the Biden administration has announced the immediate release of tens of thousands of doses of vaccine to tackle a growing outbreak of monkeypox. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the main centres in Canterbury on State Highway 1 at the Waimate Junction to Oamaru. A slippery road surface means there's a temporary speed restriction in place at 70 k's an hour until they can make repairs. And in the Wellington region, State Highway 53 in Martinborough, the road is closed at the intersection of Princess Street because of a crash. Expect delays. We'll update you again with the latest headlines and traffic at around 5:40.
Kia ora rā e hoa. Some of you have already got on the text machine about the various transport projects that we've been reporting on this evening. On Let's Get Wellington Moving, this one, what? Followed by, I think, 4 exclamation marks. We got to get on with it. No more consults. Get it done. And on Auckland's CRL, the rail link, this person says they're wasting millions on 2 pedestrian bridges 80 metres apart at Mount Eden. So not necessary. Wasting our money. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in a US prison for helping Jeffrey Epstein abuse young girls. The 60-year-old was convicted in December of recruiting and trafficking 4 teenage girls for sexual abuse by the former financier. A lawyer for the prosecution called it a good day for accountability and justice. The BBC's Nada Tawfiq reports from New York.
A long-fought victory for Annie Farmer and all of Ghislaine Maxwell's victims. Justice was slow. She was one of the earliest to report Maxwell and the pedophile Jeffrey Epstein to police in 1996. But today, Annie said it was never too late for accountability.
Maxwell and Epstein were predators who were able to use that power and privilege to harm countless individuals, and for far too long, the institutions that should be protecting the public were instead protecting them. And I still hope that we find out more about how that was allowed to occur.
Maxwell did not look at her victims, but she did address them. She said she was sorry for the pain they had experienced. She also said her association with Epstein, who she described as a manipulative, cunning man, was the greatest regret of her life.
Her statement felt like a very hollow apology to me. She did not take responsibility for the crimes that she committed, and it felt like once more her trying to do something to benefit her and not at all about the harm that she had caused.
The court allowed others who were not a part of the trial to also confront Maxwell. The pain and anguish she caused was plain to see as several accusers emotionally spoke about the lasting impact of her crimes, such as Liz Stein.
She had a wonderful, full, beautiful life, and so many of us just didn't have a chance to have that.
Turkey has agreed to pave the way for Finland and Sweden to join NATO. The 2 countries had applied to join the alliance in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Turkey's government has initially vetoed the bid, accusing them of protecting Kurdish militants. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says they've reached an agreement.
Turkey, Finland and Sweden have signed a memorandum that addresses Turkey's concerns, including around arms exports and the fight against terrorism.
Meanwhile, Te Peramia Jacinda Ardern is promising to stress New Zealand's commitment to a fiercely independent foreign policy when she speaks to NATO leaders in a few hours. Ms Ardern is in Madrid to attend the Leaders' Summit overnight, which kicked off last night with a dinner for NATO partners hosted by the King of Spain. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher will be at the summit and she joins us now. Kia ora, Katie. What can we expect to hear from the Prime Minister today?
Well, the Prime Minister will deliver what's called an intervention, or in other words, a short 3-minute speech to NATO leaders at the summit today. Now, we won't be able to listen to that speech. It's closed to the public, but Jacinda Ardern has promised to release a transcript of it afterwards. She has already signalled that she will express New Zealand's commitment to a fiercely independent foreign policy in that address. Now, New Zealand isn't a member of NATO, but in the lead up to this trip, Ms Ardern's participation in the summit had prompted some to question if New Zealand is shifting closer to the alliance, and that is something that Ms Ardern has denied. Now, she says that she will talk about New Zealand's independent foreign policy and specifically discuss what that means when it comes to responding to the conflict in Ukraine. Unsurprisingly, the war in Europe will be the main focus of the summit. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will address leaders remotely, and the alliance will consider more support for Ukraine.
And NATO will also decide its strategy for the next decade today. Has Aotearoa had any involvement in that?
Yeah, so the strategic concept is what NATO calls it, and essentially defines the security challenges facing NATO and what it will do to address them. Now, NATO's Secretary General has already said, unlike the previous strategic concept agreed in 2010, this one will mention China and the country's influence on the global security picture. Now, Ms Ardern won't have any direct involvement with the creation of that concept, but she was asked yesterday if New Zealand had shared its experience with China in the Pacific region with NATO leaders considering this new concept. And Ms Ardern said that, like she has asked European leaders about the war in Ukraine, she has been asked by leaders in Europe about New Zealand's perspective on the Pacific region and the challenges it is facing. Now, Ms Ardern will also participate in a session with NATO's 3 other Asia-Pacific partners, South Korea, Japan and Australia, and they're expected to discuss the challenges facing the Pacific region at that session as well.
Thank you, Katie. That's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher, who's in Madrid for that NATO summit. It is 5:30. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it's time for the business news now. Ko taku hua e nai called Giles Beckford, who joins us live from Wellington. OK, Giles, I'm sure we'll get some feedback on this one. Let's take a look at bank profits.
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Yes, some of the things that people might think are certain in life, leaving aside death and taxes, is record bank profits for New Zealand. And so it's proved to be in the first 3 months of the year. This comes from KPMG, the business advisory firm. It does 4 reports a year. It looks at the total banking sector, how they're performing, what their finances are like. And between them, the banks racked up $1.74 billion a day in profits. Now, a quick back of the checkbook calculation by me works it out at roughly $19 million profit a day during that period. Interestingly, the banks have yet to feel the cool winds that a lot of household budgets are. So rising inflation, higher interest rates, they're not hurting them to any particular degree at all. One thing that was notable, there is a slowdown in lending, but banks seem to be making up for that with higher interest rate margins. They're also earning more from the other sides of their business, so they've basically covered themselves there. They've also been quite rigorous in their costs. In fact, they've dropped the cost of doing business down to about the lowest level in 5 years. So they're starting to think about it. One feature of the past 18 months or so, is that banks, which had put aside hundreds of millions of dollars for possible bad debts that might fail and leave them with losses, they'd been bringing that money back because there hadn't been the level of business failures. But for the first time in 18 months, there's been an increase in the amount of money that the banks have set aside for bad and doubtful debts. So once again, they're starting to look at the storm clouds on the horizon. KPMG is suggesting that perhaps this might be the end of the golden weather for the banks, for the short term at least, and that their profits may well be flat or even start to slow down and diminish. And people will say, well, good riddance to them, but the point made by John Kensington, who authors these studies, is you want profitable banks because they're the ones that are standing behind you. So we'll wait and see on the next 3 months whether we start to see the trends of the economic slowdown showing through in bank finances.
Oh, Giles, I was slightly distracted by the mere sort of whiff of chocolate, but food giant Nestlé's got an appetite for something else. Kiwi supplements?
Kiwi supplements. Nestle, it's the world's biggest food company. You might not think it. It's the world's biggest dairy company. What it doesn't have fingers in, well, it's not worth licking. But they've bought the Better Healthy company. We know them better here in terms of their brands, which is Go Healthy. They've also got the Manuka honey company, Egmont. Their minerals, their vitamins, their health supplements. Nestle is big in that sector. And so they've spied a good Kiwi company that's profitable, has got good overseas markets and sales. Started only not much, 10 years or so ago by a young couple and an entrepreneur. It's come a long way in a reasonably short time. They attracted a lot of interest. 2017, they sold a majority stake to a Singapore investment fund. Altogether now, they've all sold out. Nestle's obviously made them an offer that's too good to refuse. Nestle says this is not about rationalisation, not talking about job losses, not talking about closures. We want this business because A, it's a good earner, and B, it adds to our stable of manufacturing facilities, new brands, it gives us new markets, and from that point of view, you've got to say it's a vote of confidence in what was once just a small company.
And Giles, let's take a spin around the markets before you head off.
The markets giveth, and today the markets have taken away. We won't say praise be the markets, that would be going too far. Top 50 index down 60 points, back below the 11,000 level. That's about half a percentage point fall, but follows a soft patch on Wall Street overnight. New Zealand dollar also a touch on the soft side, 62.5 US cents, 90.5 Australian. And I nearly forgot, but 51.2 British pence.
Thank you, Giles. That's Giles Beckford with Business News. The wheels appear to be moving on Wellington's massive transport and infrastructure overhaul at a landmark cost of $7.2 billion. The government's given the thumbs up for light rail across town, an extra Mount Vic tunnel, and roads rearranged around the Basin Reserve, but reaction's been mixed. Our reporter Kirsty Frame has more.
Wellington leaders say it's a significant day for the capital city, with the ambitious transport plan given the thumbs up by government. Mayor Andy Foster says it's the biggest investment program the city has ever seen.
What today's announcement does is it gives us certainty, and that's the really, really important thing. It says this is the route for mass rapid transit. That is now clear.
In the plan, a commuter could take one light rail train from the Wellington railway station all the way to Island Bay Beach. But Wellingtonians are still a bit mixed on whether that's what they need.
Light rail, I feel, is very limiting. It's you confined to one route and regular services. I think that money could be better spent on frequent electric buses, more cycleways.
As living in the city, it's like kind of impossible. Yeah. And also with the buses not really being on time, it's kind of hard.
The government does have an off-ramp option. If there isn't enough housing intensity along the rail route, the costs can't be justified, and a rapid bus network would replace the rail plan. It's disputed as to whether this option is the most climate-friendly. The government's favoured plan includes a new 4-lane tunnel under Mount Victoria, with the current tunnel converted for cyclists and pedestrians. An alternative plan, similar to the preferred option, does not include the extra tunnel. Green Party infrastructure and transport spokesperson Julie Ann Genter says the government's choice costs more and emits more carbon.
It's actually nonsensical to try and claim that the tunnels are going to reduce carbon in the long term. The benefits come from light rail and bus priority, which is in option 4. And of course, if you save $2.2 billion on the tunnels, you can put it into more transformational public transport improvements elsewhere.
Transport Minister Michael Wood says the long-term carbon reductions outweigh the short-term emissions. The government, however, has not yet completed a climate implications of policy assessment, a legal requirement that assesses greenhouse gas emissions of proposals. Mr Wood says the days of cramming cars into the city centre are numbered, something National's Simeon Brown says he totally rejects.
National's been advocating for a long time for a 4-lane highway through the city, through to the airport and to Miramar, because that actually takes that traffic off the local roads in the CBD and allows better public transport, walking and cycling through the city, not competing with heavy congestion trying to get through the city at the same time.
Work on the project won't kick off for some time yet. Planning needs to be done before construction begins in 6 years. Wellington City and the Greater Regional Council will sign off the design option next week before a detailed business case can be made.
Right, we're getting a lot of feedback on this issue. David's got in touch to say, I don't like any of their options or an idea that doesn't involve direct rail from the airport to the railway station. Bus, then rail, then bus. Doesn't make sense, reckons David. Another person says Michael Wood should be congratulated on bringing back electrification to the CBD in Wellington in the form of light rail for a major public transport corridor. A lot of you getting in touch about Simeon Brown's comments and dissatisfaction with the plan. This listener says, I wonder what National Simeon Brown knows about transport issues at all. His background before politics says he is a former commercial banker. I guess shuffling truckloads of money around provides insight into transport issues. He's probably never taken a bus in his life. He might be interested to know that just about all major cities in the world have light rail. The London Underground is effectively light rail and tunnels, similar to the proposal for Auckland. Maybe we can ask him when we get the opportunity if he's ever taken a bus in his life. Thank you so much for the feedback. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Regional households are down in the dumps about their financial prospects, according to new research, with food, petrol and power all draining their pockets. The Westpac McDermott Miller Consumer Confidence Survey shows all regions are feeling these tough economic times. Leah Tebbett reports.
The increase in the cost of living is tipped to be the driving factor of pessimism in regional economies. These people in Manawatu are feeling it.
Biggest pressure, everything. Food has gone up dramatically.
So energy at the moment is the thing that seems to be costing the most.
I have children that go to school on different sides of town, so yeah, gas is our biggest thing.
It's too much. Sacrifice. Don't eat.
Westpac's economist Nathan Penny says it's a grim picture.
That all regions are in pessimistic territory is quite revealing, and I don't think we've ever seen that in history. And it is an indication of some key drivers impacting everyone across all regions.
Auckland saw the largest decline in the survey, plunging to negative 37%, and Northland sits close behind at negative 32%, which Mr Penny partially attributes to COVID-19 constraints.
They battle meat processing capacity issues with many workers taking time off due to Omicron, and that meant that it was really hard for farmers to send their stock to the meat processing plants, and that did cause a lot of issues for farmers over what is the normally busy period.
Mr Penny says seasonal elements such as droughts have affected many regions. However, he believes there'll be a bounce back in the provinces.
And that's based off the fact that our agricultural industry and horticulture and viticulture, they're doing pretty well. That's likely to underpin incomes in those regions in comparison to some of the urban centres, and particularly Auckland and Wellington, which we do expect to underperform.
The Nelson area dipped further into negative territory in the June quarter, now sitting at negative 12%. That's despite the region's housing market holding up better than most. However, its Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive, Ali Boswick, says the results aren't surprising.
We're a region of exporters, and we know that export is still very difficult, and that supply chains are still very disrupted and costs are going up quite significantly with that. And also we know that we're in a place where there's a lot of construction happening and there's a lot of increased costs related to just about every single aspect of that at the moment.
However, Ms Boswick shared the sentiment of Mr Penny. International and domestic tourists will be the country's saving grace, and some regions are seeing the effect already.
It's 17 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening on Auckland's CRL, predicted delays and budget overruns, or that new plan unveiled today to get Wellington moving. Do you think it is going to get Wellington moving? Well, you can text us your thoughts, 2101, and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Let's get to the headlines now. Ko Evie Anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. The judge sentencing a young man whose dangerous driving resulted in the death of 5 people says a prison sentence was needed to discourage such behaviour. Today, Tyrese Stewart Fleming was sentenced in the High Court in Timaru to 2 years and 6 months imprisonment over the 2021 crash. The National Party says if elected to government, it will ditch Labour's plans for light rail for Wellington and instead fast-track a 4-lane road through the city to the airport. Its transport spokesperson, Simeon Brown, says the government's announcement today of its preferred options for the Let's Get Wellington Moving programme include no firm budget or timeline, and it's unlikely to deliver. A new report into the governance of Auckland's underground rail project is warning that costs are expected to blow out significantly. The report by the Auditor General's Office says the already delayed CRL will likely face more disruptions due to supply chain delays and competition for workers. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff told Checkpoint they don't know yet what the cost will be, but he's optimistic costs won't increase as much as they have with some other projects. Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in a US prison for helping Jeffrey Epstein abuse young girls. The 60-year-old was convicted in December of recruiting and trafficking 4 teenage girls for sexual abuse by the former financier. And Turkey has agreed to support Finland and Sweden's application to join NATO after talks in Madrid. Finland and Sweden applied to join NATO in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Those are the headlines. Taking a quick look at traffic in Auckland, no unusual delays on the roads, but the 6:45pm ferry to Half Moon Bay from the city has been replaced by buses, as has the return ferry to the city at 7:30pm tonight. And in the Waikato, State Highway 1 at the Waikato Expressway will be closed southbound from Hillcrest to Cambridge tonight from 7pm until 7am tomorrow. We'll have more updated, I'll have the news for you and the weather at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The latest Capitol riot hearing in the US has heard from an insider that then-President Donald Trump knew his supporters were armed and wanted to join them in their attack on the complex. Former top aide Cassidy Hutchinson says she testified today because she wants to do the right thing.
I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
With more on today's damning testimony, here's CNN's Kristen Holmes.
Once a top aide to former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Cassidy Hutchinson is now a star witness in the House January 6th Committee's investigation.
Well, hello, deplorables!
Meadows, who refuses to be interviewed by the House committee, once provided thousands of text messages in the early stages of the investigation, showing him at the center of Trump's lies about the 2020 election and playing a lead role in attempting to stop Biden's certification. And Hutchinson's proximity to him gave her unique access to conversations, meetings, and events surrounding January 6th.
Wherever Mark Meadows was, Cassidy was there, and they were inseparable. And so she was a trusted confidant.
Hutchinson served as an intern for Representative Steve Scalise and Senator Ted Cruz before eventually taking a role as an intern at the White House. Hutchinson told her alma mater, Christopher Newport University in Virginia, that she had set a personal goal to pursue a path of civic significance, adding that she was, quote, brought to tears when she got a White House internship. Hutchinson later joined the Office of Legislative Affairs before Meadows handpicked her to join his West Wing office. The 26-year-old, according to sources, was always by Meadows' side, sitting in on meetings, taking notes, and at times serving as a liaison between the former president's right hand and those seeking to reach him.
Kathy Hutchinson was a relatively junior aide, but she was as close to Mark Meadows as you can get as a staffer. She was generally with him on his side at all times, especially coming to the Hill. Any meeting that he took, she was in, no matter how small the meeting was.
I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now.
During her explosive testimony, former President Trump took to his social media site, attacking Hutchinson, saying he hardly knew her other than hearing, quote, very negative things about her, a total phony and leaker. Trump saying he personally turned down her request to join his team in Florida. But some from Trump's White House pushed back.
She was a senior advisor to the chief of staff. She was a senior advisor for legislative affairs, and she was a special assistant to the president. She was so plugged in that I would often go to her as the White House communications director to get intel on the president's schedules, his movements, things we were considering as far as events. She's also on a first-name basis with most members of congressional leadership. She would text with them. So she's seen everything. She's been in so many rooms. She was always on Air Force One.
Former White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews tweeted, quote, anyone downplaying Cassidy Hutchinson's role or access in the West Wing either doesn't understand how the Trump White House worked or is attempting to discredit her because they're scared of how damning this testimony is. Those close to Hutchinson describe her as wanting to serve her country.
I considered her my best friend when I was in the West Wing. She's somebody who felt strongly about serving in government, was so proud to do it.
She was someone who was very dedicated to her role, and she was someone that was a very trusted confidant of Mark Meadows and to many others in the West Wing.
It is 11 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Urgent clinics in the capital are being swamped with patients due to a surge in winter ills, meaning some are waiting hours to be seen. Checkpoint's been reporting on a health system under pressure, with many GPs so under the pump they aren't taking on new patients, forcing some people to travel long distances or wait to see a doctor. Now, last night we brought you the story of a Waikato hospital patient who'd been waiting 11 days for acute surgery, and some hospital EDs have been offering vouchers or paying emergency clinics to stay open longer and take their overflow patients. Dr. Calvin Ward is the Medical Director of the Wellington Accident and Urgent Medical Centre and is also the Chair of the Royal College of Urgent Care, and he joins us now. Kia ora, can you just talk us through what a typical day for you at the office is like at the moment?
Yeah, good evening, Lisa. Typical day is patients from morning till dusk, till evening. It's just non-stop. We're having unprecedented numbers of patients at the moment. I think in our clinic we're a 10 to 15% increase in total volumes compared to the same time last year. And about 40 to 50% of those are patients with respiratory illnesses.
Are some of them being diverted from EDs, or the other thing is, why aren't they going to their GP?
We are having small numbers of patients diverted from ED. Most of the patients are turning up under their own steam to our clinic. And GPs are under incredible pressure at the moment as well. And so much so that a lot of patients just can't get an appointment in a timely manner, so they end up coming to a clinic like ours.
How much more slack can you take up?
Not much at the moment. I would say we're really at capacity, and I'm hearing that story around the country from urgent care clinics from Auckland to Christchurch. We're really at capacity.
And what kind of wait times does that mean? Not just in your clinic, but kind of across the board.
Yeah, it does vary. We're seeing waits of up to 2 to 3 hours quite regularly, and that's really unprecedented for our clinic. But around the country, waits can be 3, 4, and I've heard even 6-hour waits at times.
We've heard that some clinics are so packed that people are waiting in their cars. Do you know or have heard about that?
Absolutely, and that has been a strategy that has been employed over the pandemic at times to separate respiratory patients. But waiting rooms are full, and if patients have cars and they're safe to wait in the car, then that is being employed, yes.
I noticed on your clinic webpage you've got an ad up there for nurses and doctors. So how is that going, and how are staff levels?
Well, staffing levels, it's really a national crisis, I think, particularly nursing staff, but there's also a chronic shortage of urgent care doctors. It's so much so that in places
like Auckland, it's contributing to clinics having to close early at times. It's also happening in Christchurch, I believe, partly due to staff shortages, but also just the excessive amounts of patients turning up later in the day.
So I understand that your regional DHB sent a letter to some clinics about wait times that they were experiencing at their ED. Were you sent that as well?
I'm not aware of that, sorry, no.
Okay. Do you know if a patient turns up to a hospital emergency department in your region, what kind of waits they're experiencing?
I'm not sure of the exact figure, but I'm sure it's significant, as it would be around the country. Urgent care clinics typically see people relatively quickly, and to have 6-hour waits in urgent care, I imagine it would be higher in EDs. So, yeah.
Given that you are utterly slammed and you're at capacity, basically, is what you're telling us, what do you need here to ease the pressure?
Well, I think there's some long-term and short-term solutions. Obviously, workforce is a major issue, and I think there needs to be investment both in nursing and in medical workforce. But that's going to take time. One of the things I'd really like to see happen is more of a government focus on public health measures which can reduce disease transmission, and this goes for COVID, but not only COVID, but also influenza and other respiratory illnesses. I think there needs to be more focus on educating the public about airborne transmission and how effective high-quality masks are, and also an increased focus on ventilation to try and reduce the amount of winter illness we're getting.
Yeah, well, you walk around, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Calvin, but you walk around, and, I mean, are you shocked by how few people are wearing masks, given what we are hearing about the spread of flu, other respiratory illnesses, and COVID is still, out there cutting a path through the community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not only the number of people who aren't wearing masks, but also the type of masks, because the higher quality masks, the N95 type masks, are far more effective, and really we should be encouraging those sorts of masks to be used in indoor public spaces to reduce transmission.
Thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciate you fitting us in. That is Dr. Calvin Ward, who is the chair of the Royal College of Urgent Care, and he's also a medical director of a emergency centre clinic in Wellington. Now, on the story of the woman who waited 11 days in Waikato Hospital with broken bones in her leg, we brought you that story last night. Tonight, we can bring you the good news that Georgina Lloyd has finally had the surgery she was waiting for. She's been discharged today and is in good spirits, and says she wants to give a shout out to her surgery team, to the charge nurse Julie, so there you go Julie, shout out, and to the other nurses in the orthopaedic ward who made her last night in hospital much more comfortable. The Australian gig economy could be on the verge of major change following a landmark agreement from Uber to improve worker conditions. The rideshare giant has promised to support the introduction of a minimum wage and the right to appeal dismissals. With the Albanese government promising an overhaul of industrial relations laws, workers hope it will spark widespread reform across the sector. The ABC's Matt Bamford reports.
Former taxi driver Tony Brownbill has seen firsthand how rideshare companies have transformed his industry. He likes the flexibility of working for himself, but not all the changes have been good.
Where you'd go and you might earn in a taxi, let's say $700 per shift for a 12-hour shift, or, sometimes you'd work even less. Nowadays, you're down to, sometimes $100 and something, $200 and something. The other night, I applied for work on one of the platforms. It was 4 hours for $22.
Under Australian law, gig workers aren't guaranteed a minimum wage, unfair dismissal protection or workers' compensation for injuries. It's more than a hit to Tony Brownbill's hip pocket.
I've got rego, I've got insurance, I've got government bodies to deal with, I've got fuel. There's lots of costs. $5 an hour doesn't cut it, and mentally it doesn't help either.
Now it seems there's change on the horizon. Uber has pledged to support reforms in the sector. They include a form of minimum wage and rights to appeal dismissals, although the details need to be worked out. Dom Taylor is the General Manager of Uber Australia and New Zealand.
And ultimately, what we are trying to do is to improve the quality of independent work here in Australia for rideshare drivers and online food delivery drivers.
The landmark agreement has been struck with the Transport Workers Union, one of Uber's harshest critics. It's taken the company to court in the past over workers' rights. Michael Caine is the National Secretary.
Well, I think it is a really important moment in time. We have had to take cases for workers because our laws are hopelessly out of date.
Michael Caine says gig workers deserve to be treated like traditional employees.
What we're saying together with Uber is that the laws need to change. There needs to be a recognition that there are workers in the community, and gig workers are a prime example, who are actually highly reliant on the company that engages them. And that means that there should be protections and obligations that look like those that have been built up over time for employees.
It comes as the Albanese government considers a major overhaul to the laws affecting the gig economy. Dr Giuseppe Carabetta is an employment law expert at Sydney University.
Well, I think the stars are really starting to align. I think we're heading to, judging by the agreement from what I've seen this morning, we're heading to something like the New South Wales model that applies to truck workers who are also, technically independent contractors and not employees.
Having seen the writing on the wall, he says Uber is trying to get ahead.
I think Uber is doing it for PR-type purposes, and also because it wants to show, us that as consumers that it's not, and this doesn't match up with the history, of course, but it's not opposed to any of this.
But not everyone is convinced the agreement will create the change that's needed. Les Johnson is from the Rideshare Drivers Association of Australia.
They have bucked the system all the way, and every time they've had to do something, they've had to be dragged kicking and screaming to mediation or arbitration.
It's the latest deal struck with gig companies. DoorDash also has an agreement with the union, while Menulog is trialling a new employment model. Tony Brownbill says it's a promising sign, but he believes real change will come at the hands of the government.
I believe the government must act and be the lead in reforming. There's no doubt about it. I hold the government accountable for all of this, for the mess that it's in from prior to rideshare even entering into this country.
More feedback on the transport proposal for Wellington. Reese from Tatahi Bay says the light rail only goes to Island Bay. They've already got an expensive cycleway.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A regional petrol tax or a road toll are on the cards for Wellington under the government's preferred option for the capital's future transport infrastructure. The government's looking at how light rail for the capital and a second Mount Victoria tunnel can be funded. The plan is now expected to cost about $7.4 billion. The government will cover 60%, with Wellington City and the Regional Council picking up the rest. The Transport Minister, Michael Wood, told Checkpoint he's looking at tolls and fuel taxes.
We are considering those options. We haven't made decisions, but in the case of Wellington, we have received a letter from the Wellington City Council and Greater Wellington Regional Council, and they've formally asked the government to investigate some of those options, and so we are now undertaking that.
Michael Wood says the project should be finished by 2032. The sole survivor of a crash which killed 5 teenaged boys near Timaru last year will spend 2.5 years in prison. Tyrese Stewart Fleming was sentenced during emotionally charged scenes at the High Court in Timaru today. Adam Burns reports.
Justice Osborne told the court that the losses suffered by the victims' families are irreparable and their grief is beyond measure. In one victim impact statement, Georgia Goodger, the sister of Andrew, said when she saw her 15-year-old brother's lifeless body, she knew her life was going to be hell without him. And Giovanni Drummond's father, Stephen, said the punishment makes no difference because he'll live a life sentence due to the loss of his son. Some members of a packed public gallery swore at Fleming during the sentencing.
A community health service in the Hutt Valley says some GP clinics are so overstretched they can't even answer the phones. The head of Kokiri Marae Hauora and Social Services, Teresa Olsen, says the District Health Board sent a letter to frontline providers 2 weeks ago warning that wait times at the emergency department had blown out to 11 hours. However, she says many people have no choice but to go to ED.
Trying to get into the GP is really difficult. Trying to have face-to-face consultations are really difficult. Trying to get them to answer the phones is often difficult. And going to ED is really difficult in terms of the waiting times. We're told that you can wait up to 11 hours.
Teresa Olsen says Kōkiri Marai's nursing team is working hard to find alternatives for patients who can't get doctor's appointments, such as driving them to pharmacies. A document on the well-being of military veterans shows they're likely to have higher levels of mental health issues, addiction and gambling than the general population. Support guidelines from the Defence Force and others released today identifies them as a vulnerable group. Finn Blackwell reports.
There are an estimated 140,000 veterans, and approximately 10,000 are currently receiving support for conditions such as depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. The report says it can be complex for them returning to civilian life as they come from a highly structured environment. It says support needs to meet their needs and that of their families. While help is available for veterans, the report is the first time a policy framework has been developed.
The Canterbury District Health Board has confirmed the man charged with stabbing Laisa Maraea Waka to death in the Christchurch suburb of Sockburn on Saturday is a mental health patient. The 37-year-old was on community leave from a specialist service at Hillmorton Hospital when the attack happened. DHB Chief Executive Peter Bramley says a full review is being undertaken into the care the man received. He says any recommendations made by the review will be acted on, and the DHB is continuing to help the police with their investigation. The man has been charged with murder and will appear in Christchurch High Court next month. The Department of Conservation will continue to monitor the Pike River mine when it's closed. 29 men lost their lives when the mine exploded in 2010. Local Democracy reporting says the now disbanded Pike River Recovery Agency had transferred the sealed mine to DOC. West Coast Mines Rescue has been contracted by DOC to monitor the mine, including the water running out of the drift. DOC's Western South Island Director, Mark Davies, says remote monitoring technology reduces the need to have staff on site constantly. Meanwhile, the Pike 29 Memorial Track is almost complete and due to open later this year or early next year. Turkey has agreed to support Finland and Sweden's applications to join NATO after talks in Madrid. Finland and Sweden applied to join NATO in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The head of the alliance, Jens Stoltenberg, says Vladimir Putin's demands at the end of last year that NATO rule out enlargement has backfired.
One of the most important messages from President Putin there was that he was against any further NATO enlargement. He wanted less NATO. Now President Putin is getting more NATO on his borders. So what he gets is the opposite of what he actually demanded. We are demonstrating that NATO stores are open.
The Turkish government had initially objected to their bids, accusing them of protecting Kurdish militants. And Hong Kong is trimming its hotel quarantine period to 5 days. The incoming health minister says arriving travellers make up a low percentage of new COVID cases. Our correspondent, Richard Kimber, reports.
Professor Lo Chung-ma will become Hong Kong's health secretary on Friday. He says his team are looking at ways to ease the city's strict quarantine policies, which are drawing increasing criticism from the public and the city's international business community. He says the current mandatory 1 week of hotel isolation could be scaled back to 5 days plus 2 days of home quarantine. Earlier this week, health authorities in mainland China cut quarantine for overseas arrivals to 7 days at a government-run facility, followed by another 3 days in home isolation. Some health experts in Hong Kong say local quarantine can already be safely scrapped altogether, as the number of COVID-19 case numbers from incoming travellers represents such a low percentage of the daily case number total.
To sport, and the Ireland coach Andy Farrell insists his team's focus is solely on tonight's game against the Māori All Blacks in Hamilton, not this weekend's clash with the All Blacks or the COVID outbreak affecting their rivals. The All Blacks now have 3 players and 3 coaches, including Ian Foster, in isolation.
It's everything to these players that are taking the field on Wednesday. It's the biggest game of their lives, like, you know? It is. I know there's a 3-game series coming up, but these 2 motor games for us and what we're trying to build and how we're trying to put people under pressure and see how they come through that is just as important.
Former Chiefs midfielder Bundy Aki will captain Ireland tonight for the first time. And the Black Caps test setup will have to take a long, hard look at itself, and coach Gary Stead admits they need to address several issues that have resulted in recent losses. Yesterday's third test loss to England means New Zealand has won just 2 of 9 tests since claiming the World Test Championship title last year. New Zealand's next test series isn't until February, when they play England again. Stead says their recent performances need deeper reflection.
What it means is, yes, we're out of the cycle of the World Test Championship. So whilst every test is very important to us, there is always that long-term focus of what it might look like in the future. So it's too early to say just yet. We need a little bit of time for this to wash over and really sink in, and let the people, I guess, who are in decision-making positions think clearly around what is important going forward.
That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nicola Bossetti on creating low-traffic neighbourhoods in England's biggest and busiest city. Robert Johnson explains what's involved in being a librarian for an orchestra. Because at the Movies is taking a break, we've got a special program on one of the best exponents of flamenco guitar, Paco Peña. That's Nights with me, Brian Crump, from Afternoon News at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, rain with a few heavy falls, easing to isolated showers tonight. From Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Gisborne. Scattered showers turning to rain in Bay of Plenty and Gisborne today, with heavy falls possible north of Tolaga Bay. Mostly fine tomorrow, apart from isolated showers about the west coast and Gisborne. Whanganui and from Taihape to Wellington, also for Hawke's Bay. Scattered light showers clearing this evening, then mainly fine. Isolated showers are developing in the west tomorrow evening. For Waded Upper, also for Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Scattered showers are developing in Canterbury tomorrow evening, possibly heavy with hail. Bulla and Westland, isolated showers today, a period of rain tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers are clearing from Southland and Otago this evening, a period of rain tomorrow, followed by showers with possible thunderstorms and hail in the south, and snow down to 400 metres. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain until tomorrow evening. It's 9 minutes past 6. I'll have the latest news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. More details are emerging about the moment US officials discovered stacks of bodies inside an abandoned truck in Texas yesterday. At least 51 migrants are dead, with more in hospital. Among the victims are people from Mexico, Guatemala and Honduras in search of a better life in the US. It was a cry for help that led to the discovery. CNN's Rosa Flores has more.
This is probably the worst tragedy in terms of migration that I know of in recent history.
Tonight, at least 51 migrants are dead and 3 individuals are in custody after police found the victims crammed inside a sweltering tractor trailer.
What they found was nothing short of horrific.
Authorities say Monday evening, a person nearby heard a cry for help in an undeveloped area just outside San Antonio, and upon opening the doors of the tractor trailer, discovered the graphic scene.
Can I also get one more here? I have too many bodies here. We got another body just north of the trailer. Just going to look out Hispanic Mill, running southbound. We got from the railroad tracks.
Police say they saw no sign the victims had water and that there was no air conditioning as temperatures reached 100 degrees. 48 people died at the scene, 3 others at hospitals. Federal officials say another 16 people, 12 adults and 4 children, were transported to local hospitals.
The patients that we saw were hot to the touch. They were suffering from heat stroke, heat exhaustion.
The migrants were from Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, officials say. Of those transported, hospital officials say some remain in critical condition.
We're not supposed to open up a truck and see stacks of bodies in there.
Democratic Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas says the truck went through a checkpoint north of Laredo, Texas Monday, about 150 miles southwest of San Antonio. It's unclear if the migrants entered the truck before or after the checkpoint. Federal officials say since October, More than 14,000 searches and rescues have taken place along the U.S. southern border. That's up from nearly 13,000 in 2021. The mayor of San Antonio now calling on Congress to take action.
Clearly, Congress's inability to reform our immigration system is causing or is manifesting in a lot of ways that are simply tragic.
A former White House aide has spoken out about the events leading up to the US Capitol riots. Cassidy Hutchinson told the court former President Donald Trump was furious over the 2020 election result. She said he lunged at Secret Service agent who refused to take him to the Capitol, and also told staff his then Vice President Mike Pence deserved chants from rioters, calling for him to be hanged. CNN's Pamela Brown reports.
As an American, I was disgusted.
Bombshell testimony from surprise witness Cassidy Hutchinson, a former top aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
Hutchinson describing how Trump allegedly directed White House staff to remove the metal detectors around the ellipse because he was upset the crowd didn't look big enough. Hutchinson testifying that lead White House counsel Pat Cipollone warned about legal exposure if Trump followed his supporters to the Capitol.
We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
And do you remember which crimes Mr. Cipollone was concerned with?
In the days leading up to the 6th, we had conversations about potentially obstructing justice or defrauding the electoral count.
Hutchinson relaying a secondhand account about a defiant Trump who wanted to go to the Capitol anyway, allegedly even attacking the leader of a Secret Service detail while in the presidential motorcade.
I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
Hutchinson telling the committee White House officials knew something big was brewing on January 6th, testifying that Trump's former attorney Rudy Giuliani told her.
We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful.
And when she approached Meadows for more details, she says Meadows gave an ominous response.
He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th.
After things did get real bad at the Capitol, Cipollone pleaded with Meadows to get Trump to do something to stop it, according to Hutchinson.
And Pat said something to the effect of, and very clearly had said this to Mark, something to the effect of, "Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control."
Hutchinson testified that watching the violence and destruction unfold on January 6th was devastating.
It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie. It's something that I still struggle to work through the emotions of that.
It is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Turkey has done a U-turn and will now support Finland and Sweden joining the NATO alliance. It had initially opposed the bid, angered by what it saw as the Scandinavian countries' willingness to host Kurdish militants. It comes after 3 countries signed a joint security pact addressing Turkey's concerns. The BBC's Katja Adler reports from Madrid at the NATO summit.
It's taken weeks of negotiations, but Sweden and Finland are now well on their way to becoming NATO members after they signed an agreement with Turkey to counter threats to each other's security. NATO hoped to present this united front tonight to send a clear message to Vladimir Putin.
Welcoming Finland and Sweden into the alliance will make them safer, NATO stronger, and the Euro-Atlantic area more secure. This is vital as we face the biggest security crisis in decades.
Ukraine, of course, is on everyone's minds here. But so is the wider security threat from Russia. NATO is ramping up its rapid reaction forces from 40,000 to 300,000. Like these French paratroopers preparing to support NATO countries close to Russia, now feeling very exposed.
We can't defend ourselves alone. We will never be alone, strong, so we have to have friends and allies.
Finland and Sweden agree. Just look at Finland's long border with Russia.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Moscow's aggression has shocked them.
We realized that we have to make a change. Well, it appeared that Russia is ready to try to invade a neighboring sovereign country.
Are you worried, though, because President Putin told you directly, he warned you not to join NATO, or there would be repercussions?
Yes, we are not afraid, not at all.
But today, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned the West beefing up its defences and supporting Ukraine would only prolong Kiev's agony. And that is the delicate balancing act here. All NATO countries agree Russia is the aggressor. Ukraine must be helped militarily. But to what extent? That's where there's disagreement. Should Russia be given such a bloody nose it thinks twice in the future about acts of aggression? Or, if Vladimir Putin feels pushed in a corner, is there a risk that he'll escalate, even making good on a threat to use nuclear weapons? Trying to keep NATO allies together is Joe Biden, arguably the star guest at tonight's gala dinner hosted by Spain's King and Queen. Europe's security has been thrown upside down by Vladimir Putin, but one thing hasn't changed. When this continent is in crisis, it still relies heavily on Washington.
Scotland's First Minister is again pushing for independence from the United Kingdom. Nicola Sturgeon has proposed October next year for another referendum, asking whether Scotland should be an independent nation. She's asked the Prime Minister Boris Johnson for permission, but says she doesn't need it anyway. The BBC's James Cook has more.
Scotland 2014, when politics came alive.
How dare they say that this country is not capable of running its own affairs?
This is everyone's flag, everyone's country, everyone's culture and everyone's street.
This is the vision we've got for our country. But should we do this all over again? How does the nation feel about the idea of a second referendum?
Yeah, I think if there's a public call for it, then we should definitely have one and just see what the public thinks. I don't think it's the best idea.
Yes, go for it. Yeah, another one. Oh my God, again.
Presiding officer.
Well, yes, if Nicola Sturgeon has her way.
Now is the time for independence.
The plan is to ask voters, should Scotland be an independent country? To which they said no 8 years ago.
I can announce that the Scottish Government is proposing that the independence referendum be held on the 19th of October 2023. These are...
But does this Parliament have the power to hold that vote? The First Minister now says she wants the Supreme Court to decide sooner rather than later.
The fact is, neither legal opinions nor political arguments will resolve this point. We must establish legal fact. That is why, in my view, we must seek now to accelerate to the point when we have legal clarity, legal fact.
A well-known cancer campaigner, blogger and broadcaster in the UK has died at the age of 40. Dame Deborah James had been receiving end-of-life care for bowel cancer at home and had raised millions for cancer research. Some of Britain's most prominent figures have already paid tribute to her life. The BBC's Rachel Burton has this report.
My name is Deborah James. I'm a mum to 2 kids and a dog called Winston. 3 years ago, at the age of 35, I was diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer, and I have been living with cancer ever since.
She was young, she was vibrant, with an infectious sense of fun. For Deborah James, cancer was a devastating blow. But she was determined to share her story, in the hope it would help others.
I've had everything. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy to enable me to live with cancer.
On social media, the former teacher called herself Bowel Babe, detailing the endless rounds of treatment, but poking fun at her disease, having fun with her kids, and marking life's important milestones.
I made my 40th birthday. That's huge, that's enormous. It's the birthday that I never thought I would make. I like winding up my oncologist because he's very straight-laced.
On her podcast, You, Me and the Big C, Deborah was open.
Have a conversation in your cell on the chemo wards in an orange catsuit.
Funny.
And he's like, and you know, he doesn't want to say anything, and you're just like, yeah, hi, I'm back on treatment. And every single time I'm back on treatment, I'm like, I don't want to be here. Like, I don't want to be back on treatment.
But never tried to hide her emotions.
Kids and just think, it's just not fair. It is without a doubt.
In a final interview, she hoped new treatments would soon be found.
Cancer should become a chronic disease. I hope it will be. In my kid's lifetime, I hope it will become a chronic disease. But I think there are people doing amazing things, and we need to support them and fund them.
The fund she set up to aid research has raised millions. For years, Dame Deborah, as she became, fought to increase awareness of her disease, with social media posts inspiring thousands of fellow patients. In the words of one cancer charity, the lives her campaign saved and will continue to save was nothing short of incredible.
Australians are losing their religion for the first time since the country started gathering extensive data about the population. Less than half of all Australians are identifying as Christian. According to the latest census data, Christianity is still the most common religion in the country, but its flock continues to thin and those nominating no religion has surged. The ABC's Jamie Travers investigates what is prompting the shift.
Like many Australians, a connection to the church was part of Lily's upbringing.
Standard things for us were like grace before dinner, church on a Sunday. We'd often have small group or what people may otherwise know as Bible study.
Her family's Anglican faith was a central part of life growing up.
It was pretty huge, to be honest. Definitely an expectation from my family, living a life of a certain moral standard. No sex before marriage, being generous with your money, tithing back to the church and things like that. So it was, I think generally speaking, a pretty high expectation that I will also continue down that path.
But like an increasing number of Australians, Lily no longer identifies as Christian.
It's really difficult. It's almost a coming out process in a way to say, actually, I don't identify with those beliefs.
She's among a growing number moving away from the church. According to the latest census data, just under 40% of Australians ticked no religion in the latest survey, and Christianity has dipped below 50% for the first time in recorded history. Roughly 44% of Australians now say they're Christian, down from 52% at the last census.
We now have 39% of the population claiming they have no religious affiliation whatsoever. This is up from 30% at the last census and up from 22% a decade ago.
Simon Kustenmacher is the co-founder of the demographic group.
If the trend continues, by 2028, so very soon, we will be a majority unreligious, unaffiliated country.
The latest census data confirms a long-term trend away from Christianity. In the 1966 census, 88% of Australians identified as Christian. That's almost 9 out of 10 people, with the number at just over 40% now.
And finally tonight, in the UK, a couple planning their wedding got an early present when the lead singer of Coldplay, Chris Martin, serenaded them with one of his biggest hits at their local pub. He took to the piano after they told him which song they had chosen for their first dance. Here's the BBC's John Maguire.
What's your name again?
Hannah.
And?
Jeremy.
You're getting married in a minute.
28th of August.
It may sound like the beginning of a joke. A global rock star and his Hollywood actress girlfriend walk into a pub. But it's exactly what happened at the Stag Inn at Hinton Charterhouse near Bath. Chris Martin and Dakota Johnson were chatting to locals when they met Hannah Organ and Jeremy Larkham, who were in the pub planning their wedding. They told him their first dance would be Coldplay's hit A Sky Full of Stars. Chris spotted a piano in the corner of the pub, and then this happened.
'Cause you're a sky, oh you're a sky full of stars. I'm gonna give you my heart.
Hannah and Jeremy say they were so amazed by the encounter that they forgot to invite the celebrity couple to their big day in August.
Yeah, it was amazing, really. I sort of got the feeling he wanted to. He obviously spotted the piano before, maybe.
You know, we shook his hand and I said, thank you so much. That honestly meant the world. And all my family are like, well, did you ask him if he's free on the 28th? It happened in such a whirlwind.
But they insist they would be very welcome.
And your final thoughts before we head off on the CRL and budget overruns. This person says, I can't work out how millions of dollars are acceptable as increased costs when COVID have delayed project progress. Normally failed timelines result in savings penalties. Please explain. Yeah, good point there. Now, Sue's got in touch and I really sympathise with Sue. Sue says, oh my goodness, you have changed the music for Checkpoint. What on earth will my Labrador do now? She always comes to the kitchen for dinner when the music starts. How on earth can I retrain a 13-year-old Hoover? Please bring back the old music or send retraining tips. Yeah, this is a serious issue, Sue. I mean, maybe our executive producer or one of the producers can help because they've had to retrain me too, because I normally head to the studio and the music is a cue. They offer a cup of tea and say, in the studio, off you go. So maybe you could use a clicker and food when you hear the new music, click and reinforce it with a snack. But I could ask around in the control room. They've retrained me. And I have to tell you, Sue, you say, please bring back the old music. I'll let you in on a secret. I probably agree with you. Oops. Let us know your thoughts. That's about all we've got time for. The late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening, of course. And if there is anything that you missed on the program, don't forget you can find us, Checkpoint, on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from for a re-listen or a check back. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō from tomorrow, 5 a.m. First up, we'll be speaking to the Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, and they're going to ask if he reckons we've become a bit lax with our mask wearing, given all the respiratory illnesses and EDs that are backed up around the country. Don't forget to check out the website for all our videos and stories. You have a great evening. Kia pai tōpō, and we will catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A regional petrol tax or a road toll could be on the cards for Wellington under the government's preferred option for the capital's future transport infrastructure. The sister of one of the 5 teenage boys killed in a horror crash in Timaru says the driver's punishment is nothing compared to that of the friends and family of those who died. A community health service in the Hutt Valley says some GP clinics are so overstretched they can't even answer the phones. And the number of deaths in a failed migrant smuggling operation in the US state of Texas has risen to 51. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, tensions ran high in Bromley at a fiery meeting as the Christchurch suburbs stench saga lingers.
Can I please ask the council what gave them the right to shit in my house on a continuing basis?
And in the US, investigations continue into the deaths of 50 migrants in the back of a truck.
He's rung the emergency services. They've arrived quite quickly, but unfortunately they've opened up the door to an absolute horror scene, which was, as they've described it, it's not pleasant to discuss this, but it was a stack of bodies inside the truck.
Join me, Nathan Rarere, for First Up from 5 a.m. weekday mornings on RNZ National.
Voice of the Nathan.
Or download the First Up podcast from podcast places.